So first of all, I want to thank Dr. Bill for doing this. This is a nice tie-in to our visit on Wednesday to see Angkor Wat exhibit and the IMAX movie, which will cover all that you really can't see and do when you visit. So I really thank him. I thank all of you for joining us. I do have a couple of tickets left, so if anybody here after seeing the great presentation would like to join, let me know. I have, I think he said like 5, so let me know if you're interested. And probably last but not least, this is a little different. Please turn your video off and mute yourself so we can have a really good stream here. So everybody but Bill should turn themselves off, hopefully. Anyway, thank you, Bill, and it's all yours.
Okay, well, good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to this presentation on Angkor civilization, sometimes known as the Khmer Empire, and on one of its great temple complexes, Angkor Wat. I might mention that my friend Kelly Stark, who is with us today, suggested that we have a mandatory quiz at the end. I gave it some contemplation and decided that if I said that, probably everyone would leave. So I'm always open to suggestions. Thank you, Kelly. But today we're going to carry on with just knowledge for knowledge's sake. Okay, Angkor Wat literally means temple city or city of temples. It's a complex in northwest Cambodia and a UNESCO World Heritage Site. Here you can see a view of it, and we're going to see a number of aspects of this complex as we go through. But I want to start with some history because it was the centerpiece of what was known as the Angkor Imperial State, or the Khmer Empire, that flourished from the 9th to the 15th century CE. And here you see a map that gives you an idea of the extent of that empire. But the roots of Khmer hegemony go back additional centuries, all the way back to the 1st and 6th century CE, to a state referred to as Funan. And here you see a map of Funan. The name was coined by Chinese cartographers, geographers, and writers who had connections with this state. Some current scholars argue that the Chinese scholars transcribed the word Funan from a Khmer word meaning mountain, which is Nam, such as in Phnom Penh, because we don't have any inscriptions of the word Funan itself. What we know of this empire comes from 3 sources. There were the Chinese dynastic chronicles. There were Sanskrit stone inscriptions. They're in stone, so we don't have any manuscripts. And then there was the archaeological record. And a number of archaeological surveys and excavations have been carried out by a joint Cambodian Ministry of Culture and an international team since 1994. The research has involved the excavation and dating of numerous sites, including architectural remains, landscape features, such as mounds, canals, reservoirs, etc. From these sources, it is known that the Funanese were seafarers, which is very important, trading with both India and China. Indian contacts went back to 2 Indian dynasties, one in the south, the Pallava Empire, which you can see on the left, and the other in the north, the Guptan Empire, which you can see on the right. These contacts, and this is what's very important here, led to what we call an Indianization of Funan society, especially in the areas of culture and religion. Thus, in addition to their local language, the Funanese elite adopted Sanskrit, much like European societies would adopt Latin for intellectual and liturgical purposes. In terms of religion, the Fulanese adopted aspects of Hinduism, which included the worship of the Hindu Trimurti. These are the three gods: Brahma, creator; Vishnu, sustainer; and Vishnu, destroyer. This image is actually from India, but we know from the records that the Trimurti was worshipped in Funan. But perhaps more importantly for our presentation was the myth of Mount Meru. This was a sacred 5-peaked mountain, said to be the center of the world, surrounded by oceans. Now, the image here is actually a Buddhist mandala, but can you see in the blue the 5 levels? There's the 4, and then on top of it, a crowning level. This would be indicative of Mount Meru, and many of the temples that would be built that were supposed to be images of Mount Meru, and keep that in mind when we get back to Angkor Wat. In Funan, this was an example known as the Chot Mat. See, the temple would be erected on hilltops with hopefully water surrounding it to mirror the image of Mount Meru. So if we look at this Chot Mat temple, which isn't in Cambodia today, it's actually in today's Vietnam, near the Cambodian border. But if you see on each side, you can only see 2 sides here, but there are 4 sides. Those 4 sides represent the smaller peaks. And then at the top, this tower represents the larger peak. So this is a temple that was designed around this notion of the mythical Mount Meru. And in this regard, the Fulanese king was often referred to as King of the Mountain. We also find Hindu-influenced sculpture in Funan. Here we find an image. Notice the 8 arms, generally symbolic of Vishnu. In his 8 arms, he carried various weapons. There were also Buddhist statues. Here's a Funanese Buddhist statue that was recovered. We know that 2 Buddhist monks from Funan took up residence in China in the 6th century and translated a number of Buddhist sutras from Sanskrit into Chinese. So there was a definite connection between this Funan society, which existed between the 1st and 6th century CE, both China and India. India more in terms of cultural impact, China in terms of trade. According to the Chinese accounts, the last ruler of Funan was one Rudra Varman in the 6th century. I wasn't able to find an image related to him. But the name here shows, again, the Indian influence. Rudra was the Vedic god of the storm, while the Sanskrit word Varman can be shield or protector. So we see, even in the names of these kings, this Indian cultural influence. But after Rudra Varman, the dynasty seems to have disappeared fairly quickly from history, with its territory being divided into a number of smaller, quote unquote, kingly or princely principalities. Now, since we don't have any written records, for many years it was thought that the demise of Funan came at the hand of another dynasty to the north known as the Chenla dynasty. It's still not quite clear what actually happened. Whatever the cause, by the 8th century, the Khmer people appeared to be in a very dark period. It's probable that the Javanese from the island of Java in today's Malaysia invaded for a period of time and made the Khmer people vassals under their own kings. However, in the 8th century, the Khmer king Jayavarman II, seen here, Jaya, by the way, means victory. So again, you see the Indian influence. Decided to move his capital, if you look at the map on the right, from the lower Mekong, which was where Phnom Penh is, north to this area known as Siem Reap. And in doing so, he founded the Angkor Empire that I mentioned at the beginning of the class. What's important is that he established a line of what were known as Deva Rajas, or God kings, that was to last over 600 years and establish a civilization that would rival any of the great states of antiquity. He celebrated with a grandiose consecration ritual that he conducted in the year 802 on the sacred Mount Mahendra Parvata, or the Mount of Indra, located 48 miles north of Siem Reap, which was his capital. Indra was an ancient Hindu deity, king of heaven and of the gods, associated with the sky, lightning, thunder, storms, rain, and war, the great symbol of power, if you will. His mythology and powers were very similar to the Indo-European deities Zeus and Jupiter. So in being consecrated in this way, he was identifying himself with royalty that dated way back. This is an interesting find. This whole area was covered in jungle. It was only recently rediscovered, as was Angkor Wat, by the way, and we'll get to that later. Here's a statue of an elephant, again, up on the mountain, which again gives you this close indication of connections with Indra. But at the ceremony, this is interesting because at the ceremony, he also proclaimed himself Chakravartin in a ritual taken from the Buddhist tradition. In Buddhism, a Chakravartin was an ancient idea of a world ruler derived from the Sanskrit words chakra, meaning wheel, and vartin, one who turns. Thus, a Chakravartin was a ruler whose chariot wheels rolled everywhere or whose movements were unobstructed. The first reference to a secular king who achieved the status of Chakravartin appears in texts and monuments from the Mauryan dynasty in praise of the great King Ashoka. I don't have time to go into Ashoka's history here, but Ashoka has become famous for becoming a Buddhist and spreading Buddhism, and was largely responsible for Buddhism moving both north and south out of India. The great Mauryan emperor Ashoka was a Chakravartin. Buddhist philosophers of the period took this notion of universal monarch with the idea of the king of righteousness and a maintainer of the moral order. So as king, it was not just power and rule, but as a representation of the moral order. So thus, in taking this title, Jayavarman was declaring himself not only independent from the kingdom of Java, but as a universal monarch in his own right with divine, or at least transcendent, connections. So as with Funan, the sources of information regarding this Angkorian civilization come from over 1,200 stone inscriptions or epigraphs, written either Sanskrit or Pali, and a few in Khmer themselves. Pali was the early language of Buddhism. Most of the inscriptions are prayers to the gods or to Buddha, or are genealogies of kings, ruling families, priests, along with praise of their good works and civic virtues. Other epigraphs tell us about the religion as well as the everyday lives of the population. Thus, they show us that Angkor had a complex hierarchical system of administration, and it was a very highly literate society. The first pieces of information about Jayavarman II come from a stone inscription, or stele as they're often called, in the Stok Tok Tom Temple in 1053. This temple is not part of the great Angkor Wat complex. It's actually located about 21 miles northeast of what is today's Thai border. What's interesting is the temple was dedicated to the Hindu god Shiva. Shiva, who I mentioned in the Trimurti, is often referred to as the destroyer. This is often seen in his great image here on the right, known as the Nata Raj, the great dance of destruction. Thus, he is said to be the deity of time and death. However, since death is seen as a transformation, he's also the Supreme Lord who creates, protects, and transforms the universe. All three of the Trimurti, more or less, or at least Vishnu and Shiva, claim all three aspects. The inscription that is found at this temple is both in Sanskrit and ancient Khmer. It's carved on gray sandstone. You can see part of it here on the left. It stood at 1.5 meters high, and it stood in the northeast corner of the temple. The Sanskrit text opens with the following: homage to Shiva, whose essence is highly proclaimed without words by the subtle Shiva, whose form pervades everything from within and who activates the senses of all living beings. The inscription also provides an account of 12 Khmer kings who ruled over the course of the next 2.5 centuries. It recounts their spiritual and martial virtues, as well as the events or major events of their reigns. And again, the earliest king mentioned is Jayavarman II. He dies in 877. And between that time and the beginning of the 12th century, a number of Deva Rajas, divine ruler kings, ruled the empire, some with more competence than others. In the 11th century, there were internal divisions, fractured polity, some suggest almost a civil war. But it was the coming of Suryavarman II who was able to reunite the kingdom, and he reigned from 1113 to 1150, and the empire began its great ascent to its golden age. Surya means sun in Sanskrit. So again, you can see the Indian influence just in the titles of these kings. In the 12th century, a great capital named as Angkor Thom. This is not Angkor Wat, this is north of it, Angkor Thom. Actually, this whole Angkorian civilization could almost be said to be made up of a number of major imperial cities. Angkor Thom was developed by Jayavarman VII, and he was in the 12th century. And it was a magnificent city. And if you go to Cambodia, you should also visit it. It covered 9 square kilometers, numerous monuments. Here you can see one of the entry gates. And at the center was another great temple. This was the temple to Jayavarman VII, his own temple. At its height, this royal city and its surrounding municipalities, and that's what it was, they were very modern type cities, was believed to have covered an area of modern day London with a population over 1 million. Now, it was during the previously mentioned Suryavarman II's reign that the initial construction of the Angkor Wat temple complex began. And it took about 37 years to complete. Now, unlike previous temples, which had been mainly to Shiva, the Angkor Wat was dedicated to Vishnu. In fact, the original name of the temple was Vra Vishnu Loka, or Sacred Abode of Vishnu. Vishnu in the Trimurti was known as the preserver. In Sanskrit, it means all pervasive, the name of Vishnu, one who is everything and inside everything. We saw that similar reference to Shiva. This idea that the gods, or the common phrase is, I am in everything, everything is in me. That which is free from the fetters of bondage of the existence known as samsara, this is Vishnu. And Angkor Wat was initially dedicated to Vishnu. A couple interesting stories about Vishnu. The creation myth, seen here with an image on the left from a text known as the Vishnu Purana, tells of Vishnu lying on an ocean of milk. Notice the ocean image, always surrounding sacred elements or sites, atop of the serpent Sesha. From his navel, you can see, sprang a lotus. See the lotus flower. And from the lotus sprang the god Brahma, the third god of the Trimurti, who then creates the universe, which lasts billions of years. At the end of that period, Brahma goes back into the lotus goes back into Vishnu's navel, and Vishnu sleeps for billions of years. Then the whole process starts over again. And this will go on numerous times. What's important here is, I find fascinating, is that early Hindu thinkers recognized this great immensity of time and space. Whereas in the West, up until really fairly recently, it was believed that, and I guess some people still believe, that the universe or the world is only 6,000 years old. So that's one aspect of Vishnu. On the right was another very important aspect, and this does tie in very much to Angkor, and that was the incarnations of Vishnu, or the avatars. Periodically, Vishnu, the divine transcendence, incarnates in the flesh, becomes various beings who restore righteousness when there is unrighteousness, when times are dark, when things are completely out of control, when chaos is reigning, kind of like today, an avatar will appear to set things right. Now, how this ties in with Angkor is very important, because the Deva Rajas, the divine kings, were seen almost, or in some probably practically, as incarnations of Vishnu, especially with the building of Angkor Wat to Vishnu. So the avatar concept supported the Angkor idea of God kings. So over the next 200 years, successive god kings were able to maintain much of Angkor's glory. But by the 14th century, the empire began a long and steady decline. It's true of all empires. Nothing lasts forever. And this great glorious empire began its decline. And what's interesting is that it was relatively sudden. And historians are not quite sure why, although they've proposed a number of different causes. First, how direct a cause this was is not clear, but there was the religious conversion of later kings from Vishnu Shaivite Hinduism to Theravada Buddhism. There was great Buddhist influence that came in during the latter period. Theravada was known as the doctrine of the elders in Sanskrit, the most commonly accepted name for the oldest existing Buddhist school. This was the school that spread south into Sri Lanka, into Southeast Asia, whereas the other school of Buddhism, Mahayana, spread north up into what is Afghanistan and then east, and eventually into China, Korea, Japan. How could this have perhaps been a cause for the decline? Well, the theory is that this notion undermined the idea of divine king of the Deva Raja. It took away perhaps some of the royal prestige and authority. It may have magnified internal political and religious problematics. And so that may have been a cause. Second, there was foreign pressure from a kingdom to the north, known as the Ayutthaya, which is in present-day Thailand. In 1393, one of its kings, Ramayusan, besieged and occupied the capital of Angkor. His son was assassinated, but external pressure continued. And in 1431, and this becomes extremely important, the Khmer king, known as Ponhayat, decided to abandon Angkor. He moved his capital south down to what is today Phnom Penh. And here on the left, you see his famous stupa. A stupa is a Buddhist monument in which generally relics were found. Dates back to ancient India. Another cause may have well been disease, including smallpox, malaria, and the plague or the Black Death. By the 14th century, the Black Death had affected Southeast Asia, as the plague first appeared in China around 1330. Most seaports along the line of travel from China to Europe felt the impact of the disease, which no doubt had a severe impact on Angkorian society as well. Finally, there was an ecological breakdown. The Khmers had a very elaborate system of reservoirs and canals used for trade, transportation, and very much so irrigation. During the 14th and 15th centuries, there were severe climatic changes which greatly impacted the water management system. Like I said, it was a highly tuned system, but it was very vulnerable to change. There were periods of drought that led to decreases in agricultural productivity. Then there were violent monsoon floods, which damaged the infrastructure. To adapt to these growing changes, trees were cut down from the Kulan Hills to make room for more rice fields. On the left, you get a very good image of the deforestation that took place. This is from a satellite. And on the right, you actually see a picture of the deforestation. And this had dire consequences for the water management system. Rain carried sediment into the canal network, damaging the system with dire consequences. So what happened was essentially Angkor Wat was abandoned. It was just left. And for centuries, it became overgrown by jungle. For the next 500 years, only a few Buddhist monks remained to care for the site. The first Westerner to describe Angkor Wat was Antonio de Madalena, a Portuguese monk who visited it in 1586 and wrote, "It is of such extraordinary construction that it is not possible to describe it with a pen, particularly since it is like no other building in the world. It has towers and decoration and all the refinements which the human genius can conceive of." So this was a description in the 16th century when it had been pretty much abandoned. Then in 1860, the temple was effectively rediscovered by the French naturalist and explorer Henri Mouat, who popularized the site in the West through the publication of extensive travel notes in which he wrote, "One of these temples, a rival to that of Solomon and erected by some ancient Michelangelo, might take an honorable place beside our most beautiful buildings. It is grander than anything left to us by Greece or Rome, and presents a sad contrast to the state of barbarism in which the nation is now plunged." So the artistic legacy of Angkor Wat and the other Khmer monuments, because there are many more monuments besides Angkor Wat, led directly to France adopting Cambodia as a protectorate in August 11th, 1863. That with a bit of notion of imperial gain. And now here we see a photograph of Angkor Wat taken in 1866. The 20th century has seen saw a considerable restoration of the temple complex. Teams of laborers and archaeologists pushed back the jungle because a lot of the complex was completely overgrown in jungle, and exposed the expanse of stone, allowed the sun to illuminate the dark corners of the temple. And Angkor Wat caught the attention and imagination of a wide European audience. Part of that was due to a life-size replica of the temple complex during the Paris Colonial Exhibition in 1931. This is Paris. Cambodia gained its independence from France in November of 1953 and has controlled Angkor Wat since that time. Restoration work was interrupted by the Cambodian Civil War and the Khmer Rouge when they took control of the country during the 70s and 80s. But fortunately, relatively little damage was done to the complex during this period. Okay, let's now turn our attention to some of the details related to the temple complex itself. Angkor Wat, and here you see it from an aerial view on the left and then another view on the right, is a unique combination of the Temple Mountain which was mentioned, it goes all the way back to Funan society and the Indian culture, the Mount Meru, became a standard design for the empire's state temples, adding a later plan of concentric galleries. We'll see some of these momentarily, most of which were derived from, as we've mentioned, Hindu and Buddhist religious beliefs. The construction also suggests that there was a celestial significance to certain features of the temple. This is observed in the temple's east-west orientation and lines of sight from terraces within the temple that show specific towers to be at the precise location of the sunrise on a solstice. The temple is a representation of the formerly mentioned Mount Meru, which according to Hindu mythology is the home of the gods. And remember, the Devaraja were considered god kings. The walls and the moat symbolize the surrounding mountain ranges and ocean from the mythical concept of Mount Meru. The monument itself was made out of 5 to 10 million sandstone blocks with a maximum weight of 1.5 tons each. The entire complex is equal in size to 300 football fields. The entire city of Angkor, which surrounded the temple, used far greater amounts of stone than all the Egyptian pyramids combined and occupied an area significantly greater than modern-day Paris. Moreover, unlike the Egyptian pyramids, whose use of limestone quarries were only a quarter mile away, the Angkor quarry on Mount Kulen was 25 miles away. So that stone had to be brought in from 25 miles away. So let us now take a walk through the temple complex. So here we get another aerial view. You see, to get to the outer wall at the bottom, here you see the outer wall. To get to the outer wall, you have to cross over a 650-foot wide moat. You see the passageway over the moat, whose perimeter is 3.4 miles. This sandstone causeway is 820 feet long and 45 feet across. So you cross that to come to the outer wall. Once we have crossed the moat, we come to the outer wall and the western entrance. Now we're looking at the outer wall from across this moat here, this entire section of wall. And right in the middle, you can see a type of dome figure. That's the main western entrance. That now going back, that's the entrance to the area on the other side of the wall. It's not the entrance to the temple itself. You can see. On both sides, further down the wall, the outer wall, are two gates, one on each side, one on the north and south side, known as elephant gates. They got this name, well, anyone want to make a guess? Because an elephant or elephants could make their way through. So just inside the main wall, or the outer wall, is the Western Garupa, as it is known. A monumental entrance structure that has 3 ruined towers to it. A Garupa can be translated as imperishable gateway, but its origins go back to the temple structures of South India, namely the Pallava dynasty mentioned earlier.
It's Gopura.
Gopura, yes. My wife has come in and told me that it's Gopura, yes. And I'm glad I have my editor right at my side. In any case, on the South Tower is this famous statue known as the Ta-Rich. It is a statue of Vishnu. Remember, the temple was originally built to Vishnu. You can see Vishnu's 8 arms under an umbrella. Those 8 arms represent Vishnu's power. In many of the myths, they carry various weapons that Vishnu fights to when he is fighting various demons, etc. One even when he was fighting the goddess Kali when she was in a rage. Now, it's believed that this statue was originally in the main tower, which we'll get to eventually. It was taken out at a later date when one of the kings or 2 of the kings converted to Theravada Buddhism, which we mentioned earlier. When the kingdom converted, the head of this statue was replaced with a head of the Buddha. The original head was not replaced until the year 2000. Now, this statue is regarded by people throughout the area as having very powerful spiritual connections. They come here often just to pray to this statue for happiness and prosperity, or protection against illness, etc., etc. According to the stone conservationist expert by the name of Long Mary, the sculpture has been repaired several times since the 16th century. It's been damaged a number of times due to natural causes and causes of warfare and internal conflict. Nearby in the same tower is an apsara showing, you see she's showing her teeth. An apsara is a female spirit of the clouds and waters. It's found in both Hindu and Buddhist mythology. They figure prominently in sculpture, literature, painting of many South Asian and Southeast Asian cultures. Sometimes they're compared to the muses of ancient Greece. There are actually 2 types. There's the Laukika, that's the worldly, and the Daivika, or the divine. As ethereal divine beings who inhabit the skies, they are also sometimes compared to angels. And there are numerous images of these beings scattered throughout the Angkor Wat complex. So moving beyond the outer wall and the Garupa here, you can see there is another long pathway which leads to the main temple complex itself. This is a 1,200-foot processional causeway flanked by gardens. The gardens have been added. You may notice 2 pools. Those pools were probably not originally there. Those have been added. But just before the pools, you can see on both on the left and the right, there are buildings or structures. Those are libraries, and you see a picture of one here on the right. They're assumed to be library. There wasn't a sign in them that said library. They're assumed to be libraries based on the archaeological evidence from other Angkor temple sites where we have known libraries. but they're unique to the Angkor period in that they were built with entrances on each of the four walls, while examples from other temples have only axial entries. That means those facing the main temple. Like all the other buildings in Angkor, they are built from sandstone. So proceeding down the causeway, we come to the temple proper. I'm going to show you a diagram here. You can see the temple entryway on the left. Then you can see what is known as the Western Gallery. And then on the bottom, the Southern Gallery. On the top, the Northern Gallery. And on the back, the Eastern Gallery. These galleries became famous mainly for the bas-reliefs, which they contain, which we'll see in just a moment. Now, at each corner, if you see up at the top left, it looks like a cross, and at the bottom left, a cross. Here's a picture of the Western Gallery, but there are these garupas, smaller garupas or sanctuaries that gopura that surround the four. Now we have some very famous bas-reliefs. These are majestic.
I kept this and Italy. Which one you want? Because I made a sambar.
Somebody needs to be muted, I think. Okay. So let's take a look at four of these famous bas-reliefs. The first here is is the Battle of Kurukshetra. It's on the southern section of the Western Gallery. It's based on the Hindu epic, the Mahabharata. And the bas-relief depicts the fighting scene between the army of the Pandavas and the army of their evil cousins, the Kauravas, who usurped the throne through trickery. The Kaurava warriors are moving from left to right, and the Pandava warriors from right to left. Now, up at the top, if you can go up to the top left-hand side, you'll see the commander of the Kaurava army, Bhishma. And can you notice, if you look, he's lying down, and there are all these arrows in his body. These had been fired by the Pandava prince Arjuna. Has anyone ever heard of Arjuna? He is the prince in the Bhagavad Gita to whom Krishna gives advice, both practical and spiritual. Another one of these bas-reliefs, seen on the west wing of the South Gallery, is the procession of King Suryavarman II. He is the Devaraja who began the construction of Angkor Wat. Unlike other bas-reliefs themes, this is history-based, not mythological-based. It depicts King Suryavarman in procession with his commanders, soldiers, courtiers, and ordinary people. The commanders are on elephants. And the rank of the commander is indicated by the number of parasols surrounding them. King Suryavarman is seated on his throne with his legs on his seat. You can see him here in the center of this bas-relief. He's wearing bracelets on his hands, ankles, and legs, and what is a fairly elaborate necklace around his neck. On the east wing of the South Gallery, we have the Heaven and Hell's bas-relief. It's 200 feet in length. And as the name suggests, the heaven and hell bas-relief depicts the various levels, heaven and hell, described in various Hindu texts, which are known as the Puranas, which are a great genre of Indian literature, especially for popular Hinduism. They date from the 4th to the 11th century CE. Now, you may notice the panel has 3 levels. The upper level depicts the heavens. The middle level, the earth, and the bottom level, the hells. The entire bas-relief depicts 37 swarugas, or heavens, and 32 narakas, or hells, so there are more heavens than hells. When I say hell, though, we shouldn't confuse it with the Christian notion of eternal damnation. Hell only lasts a certain period of time. Eventually, everything will be consumed back into the divine. You just might have to spend a few millennia there. The south section has this, of the East Gallery, has this famous mythological bas-relief known as the Samudra Mantana, or the churning of the ocean of milk. Again, one of the great legends of Hindu mythology. It's a story about the churning of the ocean to produce amrita, a nectar of immortality. According to the story, the devas, the demigods, and the asuras, the demons, collaborated to produce this amrita by stirring the surrounding ocean of milk. To perform the churning, they use the king of the snakes as a rope and Mount Mandara as the churning rod. The churning took 1,000 years to complete. And when the nectar appeared, the gods and demons fought over its possession. And that is what we see here depicted on this beautiful bas-relief. The image on the left shows the demons led by the multi-headed Ravana pulling the snake. The image on the right shows Vishnu with 4 arms overseeing the churning. And the god Indra flying up on top of the mountain to stabilize it. Who do you think wins? Well, I'll leave that up to your future research. Okay, we're going to go now into the temple proper. You can see where the galleries are. This is the diagram. And you can see if you just go up the steps, there's this like crucifix type of building. This is known as the Preah Poan. It means the 1,000 Buddhist gallery. And you can see it's surrounded by, look like 4 squares. Those were probably water tanks for purification. So here we have a picture of what this profile. On the left here, you can see the steps leading down into what was undoubtedly a purification pond. We know this because Hindu temples always have these purification ponds. Before you go in, you need to purify yourself ritually. But this also is found in numerous other religions. Before you enter mosques, often cathedrals, you have some sort of purification. In any case, this is known as the Preah Poan. And like I said, it was named for the 1,000 Buddhist statues. Images of the Buddha were left here. Here's an example of one, but most of these have been removed over time. There are lots of inscriptions on the walls describing good deeds of pilgrims. Most of these are in either Khmer, Burmese, or Japanese. We're now going to move up to the second level enclosure. So if you see where the Preah Poan is, then there's steps leading to this. You see this, the next square on the outer, that's the second level enclosure. And here we see, you can get a better view from an aerial view here. It's a good view too of the, see the Preah Poan with its, to the right-hand side. You then go up steps, and the second area enclosure surrounds the area just beyond the wall there, all the way around. It looks like it's a brownish, it's a dirt-like composure. And then here is a picture of what it's like from the inside. It's 330 feet by 377 feet. It may have also, parts of it may have also been flooded to represent the ocean around Mount Meru. It contains a variety of shrines, galleries, libraries. You're going to get a much better idea of these, I think, when you see the movie. It's really a little bit difficult to give you, with just standing photos, the notion of all the content of all these, but you'll see them if you're going on the field trip. Then there's another set of steps, I should mention, surrounding are these figures known as devatas. These come from, again, from the Hindu background, and they're types of demigods, I guess, if you will. These statues are all over the complex. We then go up to the top level. So let me just move back to, see with the second level you see. Then if you go up another level, you can see a smaller square. This is called the inner courtyard, or the Bakan. This was reserved only for the king and for his royal guests. It has, like the other levels, a number of galleries which one can walk through, and various relics. See the scepter here, which is the symbol of power and authority, not only for the Buddha statue, but again for the king himself. Okay, now we come to the towers, and you notice that they're in what are called a quincunx of towers. That's a geometric pattern consisting of 5 points. You see it over to the right. You may remember that the Mount Meru has 5 peaks, the 4 surrounding peaks, and the main peak. And that's what we see in this design here. What's interesting is that the towers are lotus bud in shape with redented or stepped outcroppings. The lotus is a major symbol in both Hinduism and Buddhism, in that it represents purity emerging out of impurity. That's because the lotus grows out of muddy, mucky marsh waters, which reminds me of one of the famous statements of Thich Nhat Hanh, the recently deceased Vietnamese Buddhist monk: no mud, no lotus, which I think is a good indication of the notion of Buddhist transcendence eventually. You have to have the mud, they have the lotus. So then you get this series of stairs leading up to the 120-foot main sanctuary. In it is housed a giant statue of the Buddha. You can see it in the background here. You can't quite see the head. Actually, there are 4 of them. But what you can see and get a very good image of is in the foreground, is the reclining Buddha. This is one of the most famous iconographic images in Buddhist art. A reclining Buddha is the image of the Buddha as he is lying down before he dies to enter what is known as his parinirvana, his eventual release from samsara. Like I said, there are actually 4 giant Buddhas in this inner sanctum. And behind each of them, although you can't see them and I couldn't find an image, were important Hindu gods like Shiva, Brahma, who act as guardians. So it's interesting, this temple over time went from a transformation largely from Hindu-centered to Buddhist-centered, but you still get the synchronized notion of the Hindu-Buddhist combination. In 1934, the conservator George Trouvé excavated a pit beneath the central shrine filled with sand and water and it had been robbed of its treasure. There was a great deal of treasure held here. It had been robbed, but he did find a sacred foundation deposit of gold leaf. But most of the treasure, like in some of the pyramids, was looted during the time that Angkor Wat was left to become jungle. So here's the main tower. It's 141 feet to the height from the surface of the 3rd level and 213 feet above the ground. It aligns itself to the morning sun of the spring equinox. Now, we're going to finish up here because I know I'm just about to full time, but what's unlike most of the Khmer temples, the Angkor Wat is oriented to the west rather than to the east. This has led many scholars to conclude that Suryavarman II intended it to serve as his funerary temple. Why is that? Where does the sun set? It doesn't set in the east, it sets in the west. Further evidence is provided by the bas-relief, which proceed in a counterclockwise direction, which is the reverse of the normal order that symbolizes death. So our last couple of views, here's a view from the above and a farewell view. Okay, that sort of concludes the presentation. We can have comments. If I can, let's see if I can get my full screen back on here. Am I out? Can you see me?
I see you, Bill.
Okay, I can't see anybody else, so that's not okay. But anyway, I got to probably pull this down. There we go. I got it. I'm not as uncoordinated as I look. Okay. Thoughts, comments? You can unmute yourself.
Bill,
Yes, ma'am.
the statue where the original head was replaced by Buddha, and then I think you said 2000.
It was replaced. Yeah, it was replaced. Yeah.
They didn't do anything with the 8 arms. I've never seen the Buddhism with 8. They just replaced the head. They didn't cover the 8 arms.
You know that I'm not sure, Adrian. I'm not sure that. The only thing I can say is that the Buddha head would have been more significant, but even though there was Buddhist notions became primary, there was always this synchronized aspect of the combination, because even in Vaishnavite Hinduism, Buddha is seen as an avatar. I think I told the story of, in the class I gave on the gods, about the student asking the guru how many gods there were. He says 3,000. And then eventually he keeps asking questions and you get down to 1,000, 100, 3, 1. And then the student says, okay, well, what are all those other 3,000 or 30,000? He said, they're just aspects of the one or manifestations of the one. So when I say that, you know, there's not this, for example, a difference being, if you look for what happened when Islamic conquerors took over Hindu temples, there was no synchronization there. Everything was removed. There were no statues. Buddhism, Hinduism, they've been able to synchronize much closer.
Okay, thank you.
On the tour with us?
Pardon me?
Are you coming on the bus tour?
Probably not. I think I'm in a golf tournament, and you know my priorities.
Okay, have fun.
Any other thoughts, comments?
My husband and I were there in 2003.
Now, who's speaking here? Carolyn?
Carolyn Wilkie.
Okay, Carolyn. How was your trip?
It was fantastic. And it was a holiday, so all the people were there, and they were just the kindest, nicest people, and they simply wanted to touch my skin. And it wasn't very touristy then. In fact, the only tourist hotel in town at that time was the Raffles Hotel, which is where we stayed.
Oh, okay.
And we had a wonderful tour guide, but it was a wonderful experience.
Yes.
So I look forward to the tour in LA tomorrow and Wednesday.
Bill, Marcia
Yes.
asked.
Who's speaking? Oh, it's Clarissa.
Shush. I'm just reading some of the chat, and Marcia asked what activities might have gone on in the temple, and that would be
Okay, I'm gonna call it now.
Yeah, this was the king's temple. This was the Deva Raja's temple. And like I said, the upper level, no one went up there. Only the king and some of his aristocratic entourage. The other parts of it were with monks, and there's a lot of religious worship that went on. You can see there was numerous sanctuaries, numerous temples, numerous idols. These are sacred spots. When you go into, and this could be any Hindu temple in India or anywhere, or for that matter, any sacred spot, when you, in Japan, Buddhist temple, when you pass a certain point, when you pass that gate, you are no longer in secular space. You are in sacred space. And I think we've lost a bit of that feeling. Even our sacred buildings, they just sort of, the secular just sort of flows into the secular. I've heard that some churches actually now have where you can get the credit card cash or in their narthex. So we've sort of lost that sense that when you cross that boundary. So this was a sacred site. This symbolized the king's divine right. And so it was a sacred spot, and all sorts of religious activities took place. But on the upper level, that Bakan level, that was only for the king and his royalty. There were stories, and I don't know if it must have happened at other temples, that to prove his virility, every night the king would have a different concubine who would be he would go into the inner sanctuary and have sacred communication. Let me put it that way.
Bill, also Jim asked, is there any connection between the ancient god Indra and the name India?
The name India comes from the Indus River. I don't think there was any connection. Shree's online, he could probably tell us, but I don't think so. Is that correct, Shree?
Well, in a way, in the sense that there is in Hindu mythology a story that there's a lot of drought and all the waters were stuck in the Himalayas. And God Indra, with his lightning, crashed and created a passage for the waters to come down as the Indus River. And so on.
Good. Okay, so there is a connection. I am so glad that I have experts here with me.
But the Indus River, unfortunately, the Indus River is called Sindhu.
Sindhu.
Hindu and Indus. But the original name was Sindhu.
Because that was Sanskrit.
Well, I hope you all have a great trip. And I'm sure it will be successful with Ann there being in leadership. I've been
And
on
Bill,
numerous trips with Ann, the latest one to Tunisia in September. And we always have a good time, don't we?
and Susan wants to know if Anne can make an announcement about, when and where to meet.
Okay, you want to take it over, Ann?
Yeah, if you look at your email, it came out already. So it's in your email. The bus arrives at 7:45 and we have a couple of time tickets. So look at and this time we're leaving from what would you say, the Camarillo Metrolink station, but on the Lewis Road side. So it's where you would catch the bus to go out to the university or the train. So it's Lewis Road side, be a big bus, and the bus arrives at 7:45. We'll definitely leave then. If anybody else has any questions, let me know. But it's in your in basket. It already came out while we were on this in this meeting.
Okay, well, thank you again, and hope you have a wonderful trip. And we'll say sayonara.
Thanks, Bill.
Okay,
Thank you very much.
bye-bye.